actually a very interesting one against Carlsen Christian. Christian actually beat me, I think, 2 years ago, I believe, or was it last year? So we were able to tie the score. I start with D4. Christian is rated around 2000. He goes knight to f6, c4, c5. Very courageous. e6, knight c3, takes on d5, e takes d5, d6, knight f3, g6, and we have ourselves Benoni opening. All right, Benoni structure. I go knight to d2. Now there are a lot of ways to play this position with white. In this game, I chose to continue with knight d2. He plays bishop to g7. Now I go e4, short castle, bishop to e2, rook to e8. Now I do think this is an interesting setup for white. White keeps the control of the center, and this knight is pretty flexible on d2, where if needed it will be headed to c4 to put the pressure on the d6 pawn, right? Something like that, for example. And also it does not allow black to play bishop g4 and trade that light square bishop for the knight, which usually in Benoni positions is in black's favor. All right, this bishop g4 idea. I go short castle, knight goes to a6. Not the main line here, but a very interesting one. Most standard continuation is probably the a6, then a4, and continuing with something like knight b d7. But knight a6 is also a pretty standard idea in Benoni positions. Whenever black wants to play b5 here, if they go immediately a6, knight b7, now I have 3 attackers on b5. So for black, it will be very hard to match that. All right, so most likely here the idea of knight a6 is to support the b5 push with knight c7, then b6, a6, rook b8, maybe even bishop d7 to support this b5 push. All right. Now, I was not familiar with this position too much with the knight a6. Apparently, when black plays knight a6 systems in Benoni, white is supposed to play f3, all right? And then when knight c7, a4, and this is a standard position, apparently securing the e4 pawn and freeing the knight to move away. Here b6, and there were a few interesting games, one of them being Vidit versus Magnus. Apparently Magnus played this with black. I was quite surprised to see, and Vidit has played these positions a few times, and it continues something like this, bishop g5. I think Magnus versus Vidit games here, let me pull that up. I believe it was in this line where right, black plays, yep, this is the game, takes on c4, a6, queen d3 here, and white is trying to stop b5. Black is going to most likely try to push the b5. I think queen c8. This is how that game continued. Let's actually take a look here. What happened? Yep, queen to d3, and yep, queen to c8, bishop f4. Yep, this was the game between Vidit and Magnus. And Magnus ended up winning this position with black, where he played g4. But there are better moves here. For example, rook to b1 with the idea of pushing b4, meeting, let's say, this queen b7 idea with b4. All right. Cool. So instead, what I did in the game was f4. All right. f4 is a weakening move. Immediately here, black has a lot of active moves. For example, c4, one of them being, I think, the most obvious one. Now I can't take with my knight because knight takes e4, and if I take with the bishop, then knight goes to c5, and now black has a lot of pressure on the white center here, on this, specifically on e4 pawn. So he does not play the c4. Apparently computer evaluates this position already as better for black, because there is also knight g4 threat, bishop d4, queen h4. Man, this is a dream Benoni for black. He goes knight back to c7. I play a4 to stop b5, b6. Standard way to try push b5, because if black plays a6 immediately, then I can try fixing these pawns on fixing the b pawn on b7. Now, immediately this may not be the case because here he's gonna have knight b5 and bringing this knight on d4, activating very nicely, and I cannot capture on b5 because the e4 pawn will be hanging. All right. However, here after a6, I would probably move the king first, or maybe play bishop d3. I think king h1, and then probably like bishop d3, and maybe after I'll try to, whenever you are ready to push b5, I'll play a5. All right. So he goes b6 first. I go rook to e1, and now he makes a very random move here, king to h8, and he played this move relatively fast too. Not sure, he was not sure what to do, and I think made a nothing move basically, or he actually tried to free the g8 square for the knight, as we will see here in the few moves. But definitely this cannot be a good move. King h8. Benoni is a very time-sensitive opening, so wasting time like that should be a problem. Definitely rook to b8 would make more sense here, preparing for a6 b5. I'm not sure actually what he missed here. Bishop f3 and bishop to a6 probably. So I'm trying to push this e5, but right now e5 is not a possibility because after captures the d5 pawn will be hanging. All right. So he goes king h8 in the game, and I was quite happy with this move, thinking that, okay, he's not sure what to do. So after a few minutes of thought here, I decided to continue with rook to a3. I think a reasonable move for white, and in these positions it's quite common actually, covering the third rank. This rook is ready to get on d3 or e3, and in some lines also if you play a6 b5, this rook is not going to be hanging. So a multi-purpose move, quite standard in Benoni positions for white. All right, rook a3, and as we will see, it came in quite handy in the game. Also, after bishop f3 here, when I push e5, if you do take on d5, for example, something like that, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, and then I can bring the rook to d3 to pin the queen. That was my big preparatory idea as well. He goes rook b8, I play bishop f3. Now I want to move the knight away and push this e5, standard breakthrough. Bishop goes to a6, and knight to f1. So I'm trying to get ready for e5 here, and I'm securing the d5 pawn since he played bishop a6, and I no longer can go rook d3 after e5 takes knight d5, knight d5, knight takes d5. Right, so I have to move this knight away to develop my pieces, and he decides to trade it immediately. Bishop takes f1, king takes f1, and a6. Now, after a6 here, I apparently had a chance to play e5, which after a few minutes of thought, I was not able to find. And the reason for it is I could not quite figure out the resulting position after knight d7 here. But apparently, computer evaluates this as +1, so big advantage for white, and the line goes e6. All right, now if d6, then e5 pawn remains very loose here. So if I go d6, let's say knight e6, and I will most likely lose the e5 pawn, and then d6 pawn is also going to be loose there. So I have to push e6 takes, then I push d6, and now this knight will be in the weird spot. Knight goes to d5, I take back, e takes d5, takes on e8, queen takes e8, and either take immediately on d5 or bring the rook to e3 first and then takes on d5. Position is by no means like winning or anything like that, but white does have an upper hand, probably due to a bishop pair and the d6 pawn. Right? I actually probably prefer queen d5 a little bit, and then go on bishop g5, bishop e7. All right, but again, this game is still quite unclear, I would say. All right, but definitely in white's favor. What I did in the game, instead of pushing e5 here, and my time situation is probably, I have around 20 minutes on the clock, about 20 minutes, maybe just a little more, but about that range, and he has about 25 minutes maybe. So I chose to continue with knight to b1. Now what does knight b1 do? This is not a great move, because it gives black here momentum, I would say, but I do want to bring the rook on the third rank, so I can help pushing e5. He goes b5, I take on b5. Apparently, bring the rook without taking on b5 probably makes more sense, but I take on b5, ab, and then rook goes to e3. And on rook a to e3, he plays a very weird move and quite fast too, rook to a8. Well, I understand that black is trying to activate the rook along the a file here, but this is a complete disregard of white's plans, what white wants to do in the position. And after making it very clear that I want to push e5, I was kind of surprised that I was still allowed to do so. I expected him to play knight d7 for sure to stop this e5 push and threaten queen h4 actually, where these two pawns will be under attack. So I most likely will have to continue with g3, and I think black gets the dream Benoni position actually, like knight b5, bringing knight to d4 here, and everything works in black's favor. I think black is already better here. He goes rook a8 and allows me to push e5. Knight moves back to g8. Now I go knight to c3. All my pieces come into life. The trick also here is if he takes, I can take, well actually I push the d6 first to attack this rook. Now if you play e4, I just win a piece after taking on c7 because your queen is hanging. And if you take here, this is not gonna save you either, because I can just take with the bishop, or I can also take with the pawn. And if you do take there, I'll take and then bring the rook to d8, promoting this c pawn on the next move, right? Or winning the rook. So on e5, he chooses to move the knight back to d8, g8. Another very weird move. Knight on d7 would make more sense, but, or let's put it this way, he wanted to give king h8 a purpose. So for that reason, he moves the knight back to g8, and I was quite happy with this. I bring my knight back, and suddenly all my pieces here come into life, and white's dream push pawn breakthrough here with e5 has been accomplished. He realizes here that he made a mistake and plays a rook back to b8 to move away from this x-ray along the diagonal. And I think I'm gonna say he started playing quite fast. I think this was the reason, because I was already under 15 minutes and he was trying to put the pressure on my clock, since it was only delay 10. You don't get an increment, all right? That is quite scary time control to play. Actually, if you're low on time, you gotta make moves, basically. 10 seconds can go very fast, right? So queen takes d6 here, and a rook takes e8. I decided to cash on this pawn here. So what is happening basically? I can try to take immediately on b5, but the point is that I believe if I take here, he can try queen a6. It's the same thing actually. I'll probably take on e8, and when you already do knight takes e8, I can go queen e2. And point is, if you take on b5, then at the end, the e8 will be hanging. If you take here, I still take the knight on e8, and black does not have a good discover check with this rook. Okay, I can bring the rook back. If you take rook b2, I'll have bishop e2 winning at least in exchange. So what happens is queen takes d6. Apparently a winning move here immediately would be knight to e4. On knight e4 I was not sure of this move, queen takes f4, but apparently then I have d6 move, and if he goes knight e6, the crushing here move is knight to g5, and this was what I did not see. Knight g5 basically drops the knight here in the open. If he takes queen g5, then I can take rook e6 and I win the material. If not, I still win the material basically on e6. If queen goes to f5 here, for example, trying to defend it, queen d5, another very powerful move. Knight is pinned, I'm threatening to take there, take on f7. I pass her here, d7, and then knight f7, so black's position falls apart. Okay, so I did not see this knight g5 idea, so I took on e8, knight takes e8, and I take on b5, he takes rook b5, rook takes e8, and bishop to d4. I thought this had to be comfortable advantage for white, but I was wrong. Queen goes to a4, he goes rook back to b8, rooks get traded, and I am a pawn up, but that knight is going to be very uncomfortable to deal with, and this bishop on d4 is also a very powerful piece. And when your knight gets to f5, this pawn will have trouble moving forward. All right, that's kind of what happened here. He goes knight to e7, queen c4, knight f5, queen d3. I'm probably around under 10 minutes here. I don't remember exactly, 7 minutes or so. g3, he goes queen e8. We repeat the moves once here, and then I decided to force the matters with bishop g4. He jumps on e3, thinking that this is drawish endgame, and rightfully so. I am only a pawn up here with the opposite colored bishops on the board. So if black is able to blockade that d pawn comfortably, then it should definitely be a draw. I push the pawn, he moves the king back to stop that pawn. Now I decide to bring my bishop on the other side, so I can keep protecting that pawn. Also not allow king to get to this d pawn immediately. King moves on the side on d8 and king to g2. Now this endgame looks drawish, but there are few tricks still. Okay, I think actually position is very instructive here. After king g2, he goes f6, I go king f3, he goes bishop to d4. Apparently I had to go g4 immediately here, which would be better, but I play h3. I start with h3 here and allow black to set up here the defenses which would be possible after f5 apparently. All right, but all the other pawn pushes here is a mistake. All right, if you push h pawn, h6 or h5, which is what happened in the game here, then g6 pawn gets weakened. All right, and g4 here, I'm gonna try to bring my king around on e6. Whenever you attack this pawn, I'll play f5. Then I'm gonna bring the king. I believe I'll play f5. Then I'm gonna bring the king to g6, and you're gonna lose one of the pawns there. Right? If you lose two pawns, then it should be difficult. All right. So apparently the right move here was f5, but I don't think it's actually that easy. I'll probably still try here to make some progress. But the point is, whenever king starts going around, this bishop will come to attack my pawns. All right. So I'm not able to. What if I go bishop c4 here, bishop there, h6, bishop h7? Apparently takes, king e6, and apparently this is a draw. All right, only one pawn. Here. What happens in the game is in the time scramble, he plays h5, and I think a very instructive here mistake not to make. You do not want to have your pawns fixed on the color of opponent's bishop, and that is why h5 is a blunder. Now I can go h4 to fix these pawns on the light squares, and then my bishop is gonna come around to capture those pawns. Bishop to f7, I take on g6, then I take on h5, and resulting endgame should be winning for white, because then I'm gonna move the bishop around to attack the f5 pawn, for example like this, bishop on d7, and if I am left with two connected passers, then it should be easily winning, because we also have extra pawns here. So even if you stay there and try to sacrifice the bishop for 2 pawns, I'm still gonna have one more pawn on the side. And if you do not capture on h7 immediately, then I'll just bring the king around to win that pawn. Let's say something like this, for example. So f5 pawn is gonna be lost no matter what. He realized this, and out of this frustration that he had the draw a few moves back, he decided to resign this position. Fun game. Actually, it definitely got my blood pumping. All right. That was game 2. So we are 2 out of 2 going into game 3.